So I'm now going to work on the right hand side of the path here where it meets the rail. I've got the cobalt blue and burnt sienna, I've got the number 2 brush, and I'm just putting in a bit of dark colour to suggest the wall there beneath the lamps. A few marks for the rails, keeping those nice and vertical. I'm trying to leave a little space here for a figure leaning against the wall that I'll be putting in later on. And now, still with that same colour and still with the number 2 brush, I'll start to suggest these lamps. And again, the further away they are, the less detailed they should be. It's just a few little marks really, and then suggesting of the top of them. And when I get to here, we start to be able to see the structure of the lamp. And again, with the very tip of the brush, just that suggestion of the shape. Later on, at the end really, we may need a bit of opaque white here to bring out the shade itself, but that's much later. Just get the basic shape in. And now I'm going to mix a stronger brown, just like we used on the trees, with the number 4 brush. I'm now going to the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'm adding a touch more ultramarine to it this time to make it not black, but a bit blacker, a bit darker. And let's look at this structure. Again, using the very tip of the brush, I'm going to try and leave a few little gaps in the structure to suggest a bit of light catching them. Just generally getting in the basic shape of them. It'd be a shame now to get this too wide, so I'm working with the very point of the brush, keeping it quite narrow. Working within my quite faint pencil lines, leaving that hint of white paper again, and then building in this structure. This nice rich dark really brings them forwards, and I'm bringing that right down to the plinth, which has still got masking fluid on, and that'll have to stay on there until I've put a bit more detail into the river. Okay, now for the top of the lamp, putting that little bit of shape in, keeping really fine lines, little bits of detail just hinted at. There's a crest on the top of the lamp that I'm going to put in with a slightly gold hint of colour, and that's raw sienna and burnt sienna. And again, it's quite small, so not too much detail. Just putting that in. And a little bit of dark to suggest a bit of detail in it. And now we can look at removing some more masking fluid. From this little area where the cue for the boat, we can take it off that, off the water. And I'm now going to get a number 8 brush again. I'm going to put some colour onto the water, so I'm starting with the Naples yellow and light red, so it reflects that colour in the sky. I also want some of the cobalt blue and rose madder, again a colour in the sky, and the third colour is the grey in the sky, and that grey is cobalt blue, rose madder and a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm trying to match them up to the sky itself, and I'm cleaning the number 8 brush, and I'm starting by just putting in some clean water. I'm going to try and leave a slight gap between the river and the bank itself, a very fine line of clean white paper, and then running that down, and then I pick up the Naples yellow and light red and brush a touch of that in right across the water, working in neat horizontal strokes, adding the next colour before the previous one's dried. And the next colour is the cobalt blue and rose madder, and we'll brush that in. Coming down towards the foreground, I've still got the masking fluid on that rail there, so I don't get the colour on that. And I'm bringing the blue, the cobalt blue and rose madder, all the way down to the front of the picture before picking up the grey to darken the very front of it, so that it gradually goes through from light to dark. Now that will need a few reflections in from the boats, but that's later on. For now, I just need to leave it to dry. So while I was waiting for that last wash to dry, I just tidied up the masking fluid where I've been a little bit clumsy, put it on a little bit too thick. And it's negative painting really, I've just re-emphasised the darks, leaving slightly thinner white lines. And I can now carry on with this gantry here, bringing it right down into the water. Burnt sienna and cobalt blue. And just bring that right down into the water area. And where it meets the water, I'm going to put a few little suggestions of ripples with the cobalt blue and burnt sienna and a very fine number 2 brush, just breaking that up there to suggest a few ripples. Okay, so we'll look at the boats now. There's a boat in the distance there. I'm going to get some cobalt blue mixed with ultramarine blue, and with the number 2 brush put a thin stripe across there to suggest the top of the hull, to bring out the basic shape of it. A little bit of dark brown, cobalt blue and burnt sienna, just to suggest the base of the hull where it meets the water. And then with that dark brown, 1 or 2 little marks to suggest some windows and bits of detail on the boat itself. With the blue, the cobalt blue and ultramarine, I'm just putting a suggestion of that reflected in the water. Okay, it's now time to get rid of the masking fluid from the boat on the right here, and we'll mix a bit of colour for that. I've got a fairly bright mixture of cobalt blue and ultramarine, and we'll use this to put the hull in. I'm going to take a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, mix a dark brown, and I'm going to darken the hull nearer to the water. And then, still with that colour, I'm going to break up the marks where it meets the water to give the impression of some reflection of the hull, starting with the dark brown and running that into the blue, the cobalt blue and ultramarine. It needs to be a bit richer, that, so it matches up. And then I can carry on with that dark brown colour, cobalt blue and burnt sienna, putting some detail in for the windows. A bit of lighter grey, I'm adding a touch of water to it, gives a bit of variation. I'm putting some more colour in to complete those little rectangles. Same on the top here, just leaving a very fine strip of white to suggest the roof of the bridge. Hint at a bit more detail. A bit of grey at the front. Okay, so we just need to wait while that's dry and move some more masking fluid. So I now want some more grey, cobalt blue, rose madder and burnt sienna, and we'll put this support in for the lamp. Taking it right round that rail, leaving a little white line to suggest some light on that ridge, and then bring that right down to the very bottom of the scene. And then with the dark brown mixture, the burnt sienna and ultramarine, we just get a line in under the rail and some lines in to suggest the supports. I need to darken this a little bit around this side of it. And on that side of it. And there's a little figure stood there, so I don't need to take that any further. I'm going to now get a little bit of raw sienna and burnt sienna, fairly thick, and with the number 4 brush I'm going to make sure there's not much paint on the brush and just drag this across the rail, so I'll leave a few glimpses of white showing through, and I want it a little bit redder now, so I'm adding a bit more burnt sienna and put that in at that side just to give it a bit of shadow. Just a few glimpses on the water of ripples and waves. So I've got some cobalt blue and rose madder, and we'll just do a few suggestions just to break up the surface so it's not too calm. And as I go along, I'm going to dab these to keep them nice and pale. Just a few little marks with the brush just to suggest a few ripples and waves disturbing the surface. So that's almost complete. I just need to put this figure in when the water has dried, and also a few little highlights with some opaque white. So for this figure leaning against the rail on the left, I've just got a bit of rose madder and light red. Yeah, add a bit of splash of new colour into the picture. Fairly bright red for his coat. Putting that in. There, and a little bit of dark brown away from the light at the shadow side. And then some more of the dark brown for the trousers, taking it down to the feet. I've dabbed off a bit of colour from the coat at the top there to introduce a little bit more light, and now I want a really rich dark. I'm going for the number 2 brush, and it's burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. I'll just use this for the head of the figure. Still with that number 2 brush, I'm going to take some cobalt blue and rose madder, a hint of burnt sienna in it, make a soft grey, and bring in some shadows now from these lamps and railings all the way along that side of the bank there. Bit bigger brush, back to the number 4, and a bit of this shadow colour from the base of the lamps as we get towards the foreground as well. Same with the trees, they need a bit of shadow. And then as a finishing touch, I've got a tube of opaque white. I find it's better to keep opaque white out of the palette. I like to use the number 2 brush and dip it straight in the tube. And 1 or 2 things like the top of the bridge on the boat there. You can add a touch of water if it's too thick. There's a few little details on here. A little bit of light on the top of the metalwork. And then I've added a touch of water to it just to give us that slightly opaque shade for the lamps. And that completes the scene. Now, even though you're doing this painting from a tracing, it's very important to make sure that you do have that ellipse correct. A line in slightly the wrong place can make quite a difference and it won't look convincing. So do check that before you start painting. Also, it's very important that you don't put too much detail in the distance or the middle distance, all the little windows, the rooftops, architectural detail. It's better if you just suggest them rather than overwork them. And finally, that limited palette is very important, so that we've got a really nice feel of continuity and harmony in the picture.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended version of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available to order from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.